I broke my UU prayer beads while working on this service. A string of smooth, round orbs, iridescent blue lavender beads, one for each UU principal, with a silver tree of life disc at either end. I worry the beads between my fingers when I'm tense. It's a tactile reminder that our UU values are holding me in love and holding me to my better self. When the thread snapped unexpectedly and the beads spilled across the floor, I took it as a sign. A sign of how stressful it can be to challenge ourselves to love the person in front of us when we are across a divide of any kind. It's not easy, and yet our faith calls us to it. Perhaps some of you are freshly returned from holiday visits to your family of origin, those carefully navigated fields of diplomacy, in which you toss threads of connection across chasms of differences in politics, religious beliefs, values, anything that can be construed as a culture war. The practice of loving a person across a divide is not easy in the best of times. It's even more difficult in times of war, and while experiencing new or re-stimulated trauma and fear. Nearly impossible when the person across the divide has endangered or harmed us, those we cherish, or our core identities. It's 2024 and we're in it again. The struggle to push ourselves past stereotypes and assumptions during a time of heightened conflict in the world. Russia and Ukraine are still at war with devastating consequences. Since the terrorist attack on Israel, October 7th, Hamas and Israel are at war with devastating consequences. Love as a field of diplomacy feels riddled with explosives. Amidst the horror that continues to unfold in Israel and Gaza, there are, as we know, layers of complexity. I'd like to offer a few things that I've learned that may give insight into the deep chasm. The October 7th attack by Hamas was the worst violence against Jewish people since the Holocaust. As you know, 1,200 people were killed and more than 240 people taken hostage. So the trauma of the Holocaust was reactivated on top of the deep grief, fear, and anger that any terrorist attack would cause. New York Times reporter Patrick Kingsley spoke to Israelis from different political, religious, and ethnic backgrounds in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and other cities. He wrote, "The October 7th attack on Israel has prompted soul-searching on the Israeli left, undermining faith in a shared future with Palestinians. It has created a crisis of confidence on the Israeli right, sapping support for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It has drawn ultra-Orthodox Jews, often ambivalent about their relationship to the Israeli state, closer to the mainstream. Across religious and political divides, Israelis are coming to terms with what the Hamas-led attack meant for Israel as a state, as a society, and for its citizens as individuals. And for Israel's Jewish majority, it has broken the country's central promise. When Israel was founded in 1948, the defining goal was to provide a sanctuary for Jews, after 2,000 years of statelessness and persecution. On October 7th, that same state proved unable to prevent the worst day of violence against Jews since the Holocaust. Dorit Rabinian, an Israeli novelist, said, "At that moment, our Israeli identity felt so crushed. It felt like 75 years of sovereignty, of Israeliness, had, in a snap, disappeared. We used to be Israelis," she added. "Now, we are Jewish." The layers of complexity in Gaza since Israel began its retaliatory response, as you may know, include the facts that more than 21,900 Palestinians, over 2/3 of them women and children, have been killed. Over 85% of the population in Gaza has been displaced from their homes. The uprooting, Time magazine reports, evoked what Palestinians call the Nakba, or catastrophe, that transformed a narrow enclave beside the Mediterranean into one of the world's most densely populated areas. Its numbers swollen by refugees from villages lost to Jewish forces in the 1948 war that created Israel. So we hear in these facts that historical trauma on both sides has been reactivated by the present day trauma. Trauma is also being reactivated everywhere in the Jewish and Palestinian diasporas. In the United States, anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim hate crimes are on the rise. Margaret Huang, president and CEO of a Southern Poverty Law Center, reports that their intelligence project team has seen a dramatic increase in the targeting of Jewish and Muslim communities. The FBI's hate crimes report, released in October 2023, showed the highest number of hate incidents ever recorded by the agency. They found religiously motivated crimes increased 28%, with crimes against Jewish people and institutions making up 55% of all religious-based incidents. And that was before October 7th. What can we do? My colleague Karen Herring in the Twin Cities wrote on January 1st, "We ended the year in silence, marching across an old stone arch bridge on the penultimate night of 2023. We crossed from one bank to the other and back again in a silent vigil for peace. No signs, no messages, no speeches. We promised. Words having lost their power to bridge our different histories, wounds, and worries, now sharpened dangerously dagger-thin by the flinted air we share. So we gathered and walked without speaking, accompanied only by the sounds of our winter-booted feet, a rattling walker and a clacking cane, by wind-whipped hijabs and a Buddhist bell, while those in yarmulkes walk silently among us. Together, we let the cold, misted night receive our grief and breath-borne prayers, while the river roiled far below and sirens sounded on city streets around us. What new voice might rise in the coming year, she wrote, and what new language could it bring? If we keep quiet long enough to feel our grief, might we hear this voice and learn to use it? A voice with a new range and tone, as soft as is strong, speaking in grammar not built on binaries of us and them, Instead, it's words opening outward as they flower, unfolding in multiple dimensions and pollinating a peace beyond all current understanding. Her words are beautiful, and the images beautiful to imagine, much harder to do. Yet how can we not hope and work for peace? How can we not search for that new voice beyond the binary of us and them? One of Reverend Jennifer's former colleagues is an Israeli peace activist. Her colleague would tell a story of a time when they were doing peace work in Israel and Palestine. What they would do is they would have a line of people, a line of Israelis and Palestinians stand across from each other, close enough to see each other's faces. And they would ask them to hold eye contact with one another for several long minutes. At the end of the exercise, most of the people were on the floor. They had dropped physically because of what they saw in each other's faces. They saw a person, and they couldn't not see a person. 5 minutes of seeing the person in front of you as a person was that powerful, liberating experience of love. It is a transformational humanitarian practice to see people as human beings and not stereotypes. It's transformative to see people as humans separate from their governments. It's difficult, but if we look for the humanity in the other side, that choice could liberate us from hatred. Where is this being practiced? Talia Minsberg visited some unusual schools in Jerusalem and Haifa, speaking with dozens of teachers, students, and parents, and reported in the New York Times on December 31st. In a classroom decorated with Hebrew and Arabic letters, a group of third graders, their eyes closed, their hands placed facing up in their laps, took a deep breath in unison. And exhale, a teacher told them. The students, a mix of Jews and Arabs, attend Max Rain hand-in-hand school in Jerusalem, one of 6 such bilingual institutions in Israel, dedicated to the proposition that Israelis and Palestinians can live and learn together in peace. On a recent day in December, soon after a temporary ceasefire in Gaza collapsed and the prospect for peace seemed more distant than ever, the students were meditating. If regional peace seemed momentarily unobtainable, at least they could try for inner calm. We might have different languages, religions, and cultures, but we choose to be here together. Haya Salah, a Palestinian citizen of Israel and the third grader's Arabic teacher, said to her students. As suspicions between Israelis and Palestinians are at an all-time high, and support for a peace deal is at its lowest point in decades, the faculty and families who make up the hand-in-hand schools are doing the difficult work of trying to overcome those differences. And they believe they have created a model of honoring one another's traumas, histories, and experiences that can be replicated across the region. No one at the school is far from the war. Some Arab students have family members who have been killed in Gaza. And some Jewish students have relatives that were killed or kidnapped on October 7th or who are currently serving in the military. To that end, the schools emphasize processing individual and generational trauma. They present history through the lens of both Israelis and Palestinians, and foster relationships between Arab children and Jewish children while they are children, in the hopes that can extend into adulthood. We need to be friends with each other and not fight, one student at the Jerusalem school said in Arabic. We can live in peace, another said in Hebrew. Parents have taken part in exercises modeled on those happening in their children's classrooms. In October, a group of parents in Haifa began meeting regularly to talk. The sessions are often moderated by two parents, Merav Ben-Win, a Jewish Israeli, and Mauna Karkabi, a Palestinian citizen of Israel. Ms. Ben-Win said, we can't stay apart and stay in our comfort zones. We always say it's like making your kids vegetarian, but then you are having steak. If you're bringing your kids into this very different educational system, you as a parent have to prove you're also there. Like their children's teachers, the parents worried about what would happen to their fragile community in the immediate aftermath of October 7th. When Arab and Jewish parents sat down together for the first time after the attack, Ms. Ben-Win and Ms. Karkabi asked everyone to share why they had chosen to attend the session. We came to listen. They recall parents saying one after another, after another. The parents said they were exhausted, devastated, anxious, and angry. But they also expressed a shared vision of the future in which they could be real partners. The complexity is still there, and I expect it to be there, Ms. Karkabi said. We don't always agree with each other, but we hear each other. Valerie Kaur wrote in her book, See No Stranger, her memoir of being a Sikh American. It is very tempting to think of our opponents as evil, but I have come to believe that there is no such thing as monsters in this world, only people who are wounded, people whose insecurity or pain or greed make them able to be complicit in systems of oppression that cause them to pull the trigger or cast the vote or pass the policy aimed at us. But if we listen to their stories, she said, beneath the slogans and beneath the sound bites, we begin to hear their pain and understand that they too are wounded. Of course, our wounds are not morally equivalent, but once we begin to see the suffering of even our opponents, we can listen to their stories to gather information on how to change the cultures and the institutions of power that allow them to hurt us. I'm only a few chapters into her book, but I'm already deeply inspired by her holistic and unflinching approach to transformation. She makes it clear that to make and be the change that we want to be in the world, we must feel our grief and rage, tend to our own wounds and trauma, wonder about our opponents and listen to them. She claims wonder is where love begins. The failure to wonder is the beginning of violence because it disables the instinct for empathy. Perhaps learning from people who have experienced trauma and yet work to make connections across a divide is one place to begin. I have never lived or been deployed to a war zone. I have never been displaced from my home or country. I have not been persecuted. I have not lost a loved one to gun violence. I don't know from my own experience what it is like to suffer like people in Israel and Gaza are suffering right now. I don't carry that generational trauma in my body like Palestinian and Jewish people do wherever they live. I do know from my experience of having lesser wounds that when I react from my woundedness, that's not the best place for me to thread connections across a divide. It takes great effort to alchemize my wounds into compassion and be ready to open my heart. Sometimes I don't get there. I do believe, however, and hold the belief as a beacon, a guide, a moral compass, that loving the person in front of me across a divide can be liberating. Yesterday was the 3rd anniversary of the insurrection in our nation's capital. Today is Defend Democracy Day at First Church, when we welcome nonpartisan organizations into our community to teach us and partner with us on how to fight voter suppression in advance of the next major election. There are things we can do, one person at a time. All 3 of your ministers signed an interfaith letter last week calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Although we understand the urge to defend after an attack, the toll of human suffering and the magnitude of lives lost is just too high. There must be another way. We're invited to a candlelight vigil today at 4 p.m. in Cathedral Square, guided by Milwaukee Muslim, Jewish, Christian, Buddhist, and Sikh faith leaders. It's the 3-month mark since the attack by Hamas and the ongoing war in Gaza. So the organizers created this time to be together, to grieve, to walk in silence, to pray, to connect across difference with others who yearn for peace in the Holy Land. Taoist sage Lao Tzu wrote, "If there is to be peace in the world, there must be peace in the nations. If there is to be peace in the nations, there must be peace in the cities. If there is to be peace in the cities, there must be peace between neighbors. If there is to be peace between neighbors, there must be peace in the home. If there is to be peace in the home, there must be peace in the heart." Friends, I know there are reasons to protect and to defend our hearts, our loved ones, to defend our communities, our identities, especially when they are threatened. I cannot tell you when to lay down your sword and shield. Only you can decide. But I suggest that we start small. Find one small way to love across a divide and practice doing so even when it's hard. Because love is more than a feeling. It is a choice. So may we help each other to choose love.